National news anchor Don Lemon backtracking on statements he made regarding women and their age. I don't know if he's backtracking. I might change that language myself. I just thought about it. He said at age 51, Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley is past her prime. Take a listen.
She says people, politicians or something are not in their prime. Nikki Haley isn't in her prime. Sorry. When a woman is considered to be in her prime in her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s.
What are you talking? Wait.
That's not according to me.
Prime for what?
It depends. I mean, it's just like prime. If you look it up, it'll. If you Google when is a woman in her prime, it'll say 20s, 30s, and 40s.
I just can't get over the fact that he says to a woman, if you look it up. What? Nikki Haley responding to Lemon's remarks in a tweet saying, quote, "To be clear, I'm not calling for competency tests for sexist middle-aged CNN anchors, only for people who make our laws and are 75 and older." Joining me right now, Capri Cafaro, who served as minority leader of the Ohio Senate. Okay, was this a sexist remark by Lemon, or does he just hate the Republican Party that much?
That's a good question. I think that, ultimately, I think it is pretty sexist, no matter how you slice it. And also, I have to give some props to Nikki Haley. That was quite the sick burn back at Don Lemon. But the real question I have here is, what was Don Lemon thinking to Google when is a woman in her prime? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's even a Googleable question. That's ridiculous. And I think that any sensible individual, man or woman for that matter, hears what Don Lemon is saying and scratches their head, because it is sexist, whether or not you're referring to it in the context of, whether it is reproductive prime in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, your intellectual prime. It is just stoked with sexism. And I got to say something else. I see this in a kind of a different light. If I ran for the first time for office when I was 26 years old, and guess what I got? You're too young. I got socks older than you. Why aren't you getting married instead of running for office? So I got sexist stuff on the flip side as a young woman. Now older women aren't in their prime either. So I guess we can't win.
But why was gender even brought up? Because Nikki Haley's statement had nothing to do with gender. She wanted competency tests for those who were over 75. Whether you were male or female, that didn't even need to enter into the conversation. But you can Google whether a woman, when is a woman in her prime, but it's just a whole bunch of opinions, not any scientific data. Let's listen to what Don Lemon said as he doubled and tripled down on his statement later on in the show.
To your point earlier, the idea of prime that you would Google on the internet, that's about sexual and reproductive prime. That's not actually about like mental health and aging. No one's going to look at Nikki Haley and say, is she in her prime or not?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there may be some people who would say, because again, I don't think people would be saying that if she didn't bring it up.
I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
She didn't bring it up.
He didn't bring it up. Let's listen to what some are saying was an apology. I mean, you Google, Don Lemon apologizes. He never actually says, I apologize. He says, quote, "The reference I made to a woman's prime this morning and was inartful and irrelevant, as colleagues and loved ones have pointed out, and I regret it. A woman's age doesn't define her either personally or professionally. I have countless women in my life who prove that every day." But he never really says, you know what, I'm sorry, I put my foot in my mouth. I apologize. That was insulting. That was completely wrong. Does this help at all?
There's a big difference. No, because there's a big difference between regret and apology. He's regretting it. Why is he regretting it? Because he's been put through the ringer by, everybody publicly about these statements. And, I think he probably regrets it. I don't want to speculate on behalf of Don Lemon, but, he probably regrets it because he's gotten a lot of flack for those comments. And that is different than an apology. And I think your earlier comment about this, Adrienne, the fact of the matter is that Nikki Haley's comments about mental competency for elected officials or lawmakers had no reference to gender, and gender should have never been put into this conversation to begin with, which is why, I think Don Lemon's comments, are, obviously sexist. We're not having that, conversation of whether or not, fill in the blank man is in their, prime, so to speak.
It was just, I have to say, it was ignorant. This isn't an opinion from me. It was ignorant. Because he was the pot calling the kettle black, saying that Nikki Haley was being ageist and doubling down on those comments. He's 56. And the fact is, women's fertility and candidacy should never come into the same conversation.
Amen to that.
All right, Capri Cafaro, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.